Welcome to Current Conversations, a podcast imagined by Be Alive and Rivers Are Life, where we discuss freshwater systems, the important role that rivers and watersheds play in our world, and how educating conservationists leads to a healthier planet. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode and for being part of a ripple of action that is creating change. I'm Ariel Roth, Community Manager and co-host of our show.
And I'm Julia Rajewski, Impact Manager and your other co-host. Today's episode centers on two Michigan-based nonprofit leaders who are leveraging creative partnerships and land conservancy to protect watersheds.
Chris Bunch, Executive Director of Six Rivers Land Conservancy, is an experienced land protection professional whose work now focuses on the Bell, Clinton, Flint, Huron, Rouge, and Shiawassee rivers. These six rivers, for which the organization is named, are protected through collaborators with private landowners who opt to permanently conserve their land and with public agency partners to create green spaces.
Our other guest, Elan Lipschitz, is the Executive Director at Little Forks Conservancy, which protects local rivers and streams in Michigan's Tittabawassee River watershed. Like Chris, Elan's work also centers on conservation easements and the acquisition of critical natural areas while empowering the local community with events and volunteer stream monitoring programs.
For listeners who may not know, Rivers Are Life is based in Midland, Michigan, which is where we're recording from now. So this episode is near and dear to our hearts. Enjoy.
Okay, well, Elan, I think we'd like to start with you. So, as Executive Director of Little Forks Conservancy, you've been instrumental in the organization's growth and impact. We're familiar with you and your work just through Be Alive professionally, but could you share with us and our listeners the founding story of Little Forks Conservancy and your mission?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think really our founding origins really come out of the local rivers and streams that kind of eventually come into Midland and kind of define our community. So back in the 90s, if not beyond, they had a core group of individuals that really spent a lot of time looking at the Tittabawassee, the Pine, the Chippewa rivers and figuring out how can we protect these. And, Midland's a good planning town. They went through all sorts of meetings. They had all sorts of gatherings, and they initially looked at doing zoning to protect the rivers, which didn't really work out. And then one of our board members who also works at the Chippewa Nature Center and another gentleman had heard about the Elan Conservancy. And so they went and met with folks up there and said, hey, this is what Little Forks needs. Little Forks needs a conservancy that could spend their time and energy focusing on our local rivers and streams. And that's kind of how we began. And from there, we just grew. And, initially thinking about our service area, which talks about the Tittabawassee River watershed, initially they were looking at rivers, but we've just kind of spread out over the years. And, from those, humble beginnings of just kind of grown and continue to focus on rivers and turning that into nature preserves, and then also working with private landowners to develop conservation easements to protect some of those key properties. So it's really pretty great. And there's still a handful of those founding board members still around. So I love getting together with them and hearing their stories, which is really pretty inspirational because, man, they are still as dedicated, 25 plus years ago then as they are now to just seeing us continue to do our good work.
Cool. And that leads your comment of public agencies and private landowners leads into a great question for you, Chris. No pressure. But I am interested because you are with the organization Six Rivers Land Conservancy. So before I get to my actual question, are you guys named that because you have six rivers going into your area?
Yeah, that's a little bit of the sort of like
Okay.
Elan did a little bit of the founding story, but I can elaborate when you're ready.
And so you guys, same thing as Elan, you are focused on protecting those natural areas and watersheds and all of that. How does your organization work with private landowners and public agencies to help protect those natural areas?
Well, so the bottom line is, just like Little Forks and other land conservancies, we're all about personal values for nature and land. And so we work with people who share that sense of value. And it is a tremendously rewarding field to be in because the people you're working with, 90% of them all the time share that commitment to conservation. So with private landowners, they typically want to see their land protected because they have a deep connection to it, whether it's, like me and our family property up north, I'm a fourth generation owner. People down here that have been farmers forever or just have really deep connections. they want to make sure that it stays that way for all of the natural systems and the critters and the natural features, but also for future generations. So we help them do that either by donating a conservation easement, which restricts the land and we have the right to enforce it, or sometimes they donate the property and it becomes a nature preserve, or then we get into what's really sort of the combination of public-private, when a property is going to become a natural area or preserve or park for one of our public agency partners. And so sometimes they initiate the contact and ask us to help, and sometimes a landowner says, I'd really like this to happen, and we reach out to the public agency. But typically what happens in those instances is anything from us helping with the actual transaction and finding the funds to make it so, to stepping in front of the bus. We will go in and buy the property and hold it while the public agency finds the funding to then cash us out. So we've got several of those we're working on right now where either we own it or we control it by contract, and our public agency partners are pulling together the funding to cash us out and then make it a preserve or natural area or park.
Yeah. And Chris, I like the idea of the public-private partnership and, managing the land around the river as a way to affect the river itself. I wonder if you could talk about that, because we explore, plastic pollution, litter, water quality, all sorts of things in our work, because we're rivers are life. We're really focused on the river and the water. But I'm curious to know, what is the kind of technical interaction that takes place between the land surrounding rivers and the river? Why control so much of the land around the river? What are the impacts that you're trying to, positive impacts that you're trying to make happen, and the negative impacts that you're trying to mitigate?
Sure. So I will temper this by saying that I don't have natural resources training, so some of this Elan may straighten out, but I'll put it in straight up blue collar layman terms, right?
That's great.
What happens to the land happens to the water, right? That's why we talk about watersheds. That's why they're so important. The rain, the runoff, all of that hits the land first before it gets to the water, before it gets to the wetland, before it gets to the river, the lake, the ocean, whatever. So managing what happens on that landscape is critical to managing the inputs to the water system. And I'll go left and say that one of our big challenges, in our world, it's always a moving target. And so we have applied for funding, both from foundations and public agencies on a regular basis, to acquire conservation easements and to protect land for water quality. And the long-term, the historic approach to that has been to define the qualitative nature of the land you're trying to protect. So what's on it? Is it forest? Is it wetland? Is it close to the river? Is it close to other protected properties? So those qualitative things typically give you your score that goes into whatever the grant application is. Well, our good friends on the other side of the table are very good at moving the goalposts. So you will work really, really hard to ring all the bells and do a fabulous job defining all of that qualitative natural feature stuff. And then they'll say, well, we want to know what the quantitative inputs are. How much phosphorus are you preventing? How much nitrogen are you preventing? Well, up until recently, that required us to hire an engineer to do the math, right? I don't have people on staff that can do that. It takes time. And so got a little frustrated a couple of years ago, got some grant funding, and worked with an engineering firm to create a computer program, a GIS program that calculates the water quality inputs of land that is protected. So I can now tell you, with a few keystrokes, I can tell you that the 1,100 acres we've protected in the Clinton River watershed prevents 25 tons of sediment per year from entering into the river.
Technology is wild.
That's right. If that land were developed, right, if it were rooftops and lawns and driveways and everything else, then you would have much greater inputs of phosphorus, nitrogen, dissolved oxygen, or in today's parlance, biological oxygen demand. Elan, I'm making certain that I'm.
Yeah, you're doing great.
And and sediment, right? And sediment's all the stuff that comes off driveways and roads and so forth. So that tool is pretty important to us, because now I can show you very quickly what the technical impacts are to the water of the land that we protect.
Yeah. Elan, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah,
Like you covered a lot.
I think that's pretty well said. He covered the science and the technological quantifications really pretty cool. I think at the end of the day, it's also just seeing how that land, Michigan's landscapes changed considerably over the years. I mean, I never knew how much I know now about, previous forest use history and land use change, and thinking about how our systems are still recovering, and how, just protecting the land along those, like Chris was saying, along those rivers and streams could have a huge impact. Protecting those, those vernal pools, those wetlands, and those agreements that we develop with landowners, which are so critical, keep those properties intact. So there's not going to be new roads, there's not going to be new houses. It's all going to be relatively, habitat that's kept in place. I mean, so it's, there's definitely the numbers and the science and how it's impacting our rivers from a water quality standpoint. There's also sometimes how it's affecting the landscape from just keeping that wildlife habitat intact, keeping, those healthy vegetated buffers, which goes back to that sort of origin we started about, because honestly, that's what our board was looking at years ago, was like, we want to see healthy riparian buffers along our rivers and streams and keeping that intact. And that's what we try to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, I want to go back to when you said what happens to the land happens to the water, and you just put it in blue collar layman's terms, because sometimes that can make a bigger impact with the average person than all of the, fancy keystrokes that get you exact numbers and stuff like that. They're great to have, but both of your organizations really focus on community engagement and education, and those are core parts in your mission. How do you help raise awareness with locals and get them involved, and what strategies are you putting in place? So stepping away from the organizations you're working with and looking at locals and getting them involved in the blue collar layman's terms.
Yeah, so I think there are two distinct important answers to that question. One is that we try and stick to our lane. And I'll be brutal. It's a very sophisticated lane and a little bit obscure, and so it's hard to not get sucked into all of the technical language. We get excited about that, and we start spewing $4 words, and people's eyes glaze over and they run away. So we try and stick to our lane and focus on connecting with people that share our commitment to the natural values and the landscape, to the birds, to the wildlife, to the peace and quiet, right? I mean, I can talk to people about, listen, when I step into the middle of Turtle Woods Preserve, which is in Troy, in Troy, Michigan, Detroit suburb, highly developed. This is the largest unprotected piece of property. It's a forested wetland. I step into the middle of that and I can't hear the roads. What I can hear are the trees. What I can see and hear are the birds and the other critters. And so we try and engage at that level of connectivity with people, whether they're landowners or whether they're members, that don't own land but care about protecting and preserving those opportunities. And so we try and focus there, and then we try and work very closely with our partners in the watershed councils to deal with more of the educational and stewardship component for the rivers themselves, right? So Clinton River Watershed Council, Friends of the Rouge, those guys, they do stream monitoring, and they've got that down. That is their business, right? That is what they do. So there's no point in us duplicating that or competing on that front. Instead, we try and partner with them to engage landowners to talk about what they can do to manage their property and to protect their property to preserve the water quality. So we look at leveraging the strengths of both organizations rather than button heads.
Yeah, I love that approach. We both work in marketing and communications now, so the idea of connecting with that specific group of people, that's really intriguing to me, and knowing that their actions are going to be different than just, anybody else. So it's an interesting approach. Yeah. I really like it. And I was just gonna say, it really is more of a collaborative effort versus a competitive effort. And we all have our own strengths and weaknesses and skill sets. So when you can bring all of those together, it does make a bigger impact. Yeah. I'd love to hear from you both. I mean, this work is so interesting. What are some of the success stories you've seen over your years of work within this organization and any others? I mean, what are some of the accomplishments you're most proud of here?
I could talk a little bit. We've done, so many projects that, as we sort of started out. I've been with Little Forks a long time, so I've been kind of from our early days to now. But, one of our neatest projects I think that we've completed that I kind of think's been really cool is the work we've done up in the Cedar River watershed, which is one of the few cold water fisheries that we have, in close proximity to Midland and in the Tittabawassee watershed. So, that was a project that started in the mid 2000s, working with one individual landowner who, as we talked earlier about, protected his land with a conservation easement. But like we mentioned earlier, some of that education component, the more landowners we talk to, the more, because we've got it's sort of like a mix of hard and soft sales. We're trying to work with people gently, but somewhat, trying to get them to protect some of these properties. And from that early project in the 2000s, we've kind of leveraged that to protecting almost another 1,000 acres of land through conservation easements, working both with private landowners, working with some assistance from the state of Michigan. We also now have a nature preserve up in that watershed, which is a 270-acre property that just also provides access to that unique resource. And then from that, we talked a little earlier, I will say Little Forks, we stay in our lane, but our lane's gotten wider because we don't have some of the same resources that Chris has. But, within that watershed too, we've begun doing volunteer stream monitoring. We've done a river cleanup for multiple years now, last year, which the Be Alive folks came out too. So it's really seeing all of these things come together to holistically protect this watershed. And we're still, we've just done this much work. And the nice part about the work we do and Six Rivers do, when I'm not here, when Chris isn't here, there's going to be somebody sitting in this chair doing that same work, working with those same landowners. Because the reality, these projects don't happen overnight. You've got to, drink a lot of cups of coffee. You've got to have a lot of, doors open, conversations, because, people take time and we don't rush those folks. And so to see some of these accomplishments come together has really been pretty unique. And, we're pretty excited about that.
It is cool to listen to all of you guys talk. So, Elan, you probably know him. Chris, you probably do too. But I know Zach Brannigan, who is with Saginaw Basin Land Conservancy. I have known him since I was a kid. He's one of my Uncle Chad's best friends. But it is so interesting to listen to you guys talk, because I hear Zach talk about it as well, and I'm involved in that organization. And it's just cool. I think listening to you guys talk about your projects and everything, it's so in line, but you each have your own little bubbles that you're doing. It's just interesting. What about you, Chris? Big accomplishments, proud moments?
Sure. Well, I think scope and scale is always a big part of the discussion, right? So, Elan referred to the fact that we have some different resources down here than they do. We are in the most developed part of the state. We are also in the economic engine of the state. So there is a lot of economic capacity down here, but there is also, and this is it's not good, bad, or indifferent. It just is. There is a multi-generational thought process down here in Southeast Michigan that nature is up north. This is where we build things, and then we get in our car and drive up north to go see nature. And so we are trying to adjust that vision, that thought process, right? There's 8.5 million acres of conservation and recreation land in the state of Michigan, more than any state east of the Mississippi River. But only 250,000 of that is down here in Southeast Michigan, where more than half the state's population lives and works. So, we want to shift that equation. We think it's important, for the social reasons that people need access to nature, but also because we're a conservation organization. So the more land that gets protected, the more we're accomplishing our mission. So the things that we're most grateful for and most excited about, are those projects that develop some big visibility and create the aha moment for a lot of people. The Fox Nature Preserve of Oakland Township is an assist project that we did. We had to step in front of the bus. We had about, 6 months maximum to turn around a $5 million acquisition to acquire that and hold it for the township while they applied to the Natural Resources Trust Fund and get a grant. And they did. we got in front of the bus. We took down the property. We held it. They applied to the trust fund. They got the grant. They added 230 acres of what is now in this part of the state extraordinarily rare habitat. That was really cool. And one that we're working on right now with our partners at Oakland County Parks, the Turtle Woods acquisition. That's going to be huge because it's surrounded by a gazillion people. It will be their southeasternmost park. It will be their very first nature preserve only park. So that's a big deal. It's going to get a lot of visibility and a lot of attention for conserving natural features. And it has significant bearing on the Clinton River because it's a forested wetland and there is a drain running through the property that empties into the Red Run, which is a tributary of the Red River or of the Clinton River. So it's going to have huge water quality benefits by preserving its function rather than seeing all the trees come down and more rooftops and driveways and lawn. So those are the things we're excited about.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on like the fact that Michigan has the most natural land, or the amount that we have. I'm a really avid hiker and camper, and so I don't always travel north. I do travel south because you guys do have great preserves and nature areas, and I don't think a ton of people realize it about our state. And Elan, you can probably agree too. Like, we are up north for you guys, Chris, but like up north for us is going up to like Travers and stuff. Like, everyone in our state, and I'm sure it's a lot of states that have similar ecosystems to us, feel the need to travel up north, and then we sit in traffic for 3 hours because everyone has to go up north, where people could travel south from any location and still feel like they're up north. So I'm glad that you touched on that.
Well, and I will just add, I mean, this is a place where I'll get in a lot of trouble, but one of the things that we are terrible about in Southeast Michigan is talking about our natural assets. There are 20,000 acres of metro parks, 7,000 acres of Oakland County parks alone, just in Oakland County, right? So in the 7 counties that make up what people think of as Southeast Michigan, if you turn on the television down here, you will see ads to buy another lawyer, buy another car, buy another mattress. If you turn on the television and you get 9 and 10 News up north, the big, you will see PSAs that say that are, a video of the river with the background and the music, and then it says another reason why we live here. So you don't see any of that down here. There's no connection to that.
Imagine in the summer if we just stayed local or went downstate, how much time we would save driving, camping every weekend instead of sitting in traffic to go north. It would be a game changer to our weekends.
Think of the ecological impact, right? If you really want to talk about reducing the carbon footprint, right? So, if you kept 10% of the people down here, and that's not to detract from the up north economy, but if you kept 10% down here, what kind of impact would that have on carbon footprint, right? What kind of impact would that have on the local economy? If you kept those dollars down here for, even just one weekend, what kind of impact would that have? So we don't think about it well. And we're talking about a bunch of nerdy stuff here. The bottom line is if you protect the land and protect the habitat and protect the critters, it is better for all of us, and all of our friends and family benefit from that. They get to walk outside and see a bird. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. I think that's really key, just protect, letting people know what local resources we have. You don't have to, drive 2 hours to kayak on a nice river close to home. You don't have to go very far to go on a hike, like Chris said, where you could feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's just, it's kind of, I think that thing we continually work at is just promoting what's in our backyard and getting people to appreciate that, because the more they appreciate what we have locally, the more they appreciate what Chris and I are doing, the more that translates into more protected land, more financial support, more everything to just keep doing good work.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how that conversation may have changed over time. You mentioned that we don't think about it well. It's that there are these perceptions of you have to drive far away, whereas in actuality there are all these things close to you. How have you felt that conversation and those perceptions changing over time since you both started working in your positions? I don't know, how is just like the attitude surrounding local conservation changed, do you think?
I think the thing that we're seeing is just kind of a greater local awareness. The more people that we run into that get out to our properties that we've protected, I think that translates into a greater understanding of what we have in our backyard. I mean, I think it's, because even I remember first starting in the mid 2000s, I mean, everybody was, we were talking to folks who are our supporters at the same time. They all went up north on the weekends. They had their homes up in Leelanau, up on Higgins Lake, those places. So I think we're seeing more of the folks that we run into around town talking about when they're going out, they're going to some of our properties. We do try to track usage of visitors, and we see, probably 8,000 to 10,000 visitors to our nature preserves a year, which I think is continually grown up. I think people are looking for places to go for shorter jaunts on a weekend. And the more we, earlier we talked about kind of where we stay and the work we do, because one of the things we like to focus on is trying to inspire that next generation of conservationists. One of the things I say is when Chris and I aren't doing this, who's going to be the next, land protection specialist, executive director, whichever? Because when you go to college, they don't say we're going to teach you how to protect land working with private and public entities. There's not a whole lot of lades that teach you how to do that. So I think trying to get, that next generation to think about this and not necessarily, and see what's in their backyard and how they could be change makers, I think is pretty critical. And so I'm optimistic. I guess I'll just sort of leave it at that and hear what Chris has to say.
So in large part, I agree with Elan. I'm going to do this again. I do this regularly. I'm going to qualify my answer. Part of the problem is we're inside the bubble, right? So, what am I seeing? And I get all excited about what I see, but I'm inside the bubble. And I'm not sure that my answers are going to be an accurate reflection, except within the context of inside the bubble. So, how are we seeing things change? We can talk about the numbers, right? How many acres we've protected, how much money we've raised, how many members we have. Those things, those hard stats are the kind of things that you show to foundations or whomever you're asking for funding. Look at how we're growing. But the cultural implications, this is a little bit back to what we're most grateful for. So one of the things we did a couple of years ago was started a focus group asking the question, the 250,000 acres of conservation land in Southeast Michigan, can we change that? Should we change that? And everybody came out of it nodding their head and saying yes. And what happened was our partner, SEMCOG, Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, took that on and created an initiative. They had done a green infrastructure vision for the region several years ago, but they took that on and created a task force to create the green initiative. And the whole point in that was to set benchmarks and targets. Well, Southeast Michigan Council of Government has members of almost every single local unit of government here in these 7 counties. And they brought in Flagstar Bank, DTE, Ford Motor Company, Consumers Energy, a whole bunch of big industry. So this task force came out with a set of strategic goals, one of which is to increase the amount of conservation and recreation land in Southeast Michigan by 600,000 acres by 2050. In order to meet a 30% preservation target, we want to get to 850,000 acres of conservation land. So to me, that's a not insignificant measure of the influence that we're having. It's a little bit of a bank shot, right? It's not me saying, oh, we added another 450 acres of protected land in these 2 deals this year, right? It's not me saying, oh, we added another 600 members, but that is a pretty big, hairy goal. There's a word I'm leaving out of that but that's a huge vision. That's a pretty big, hairy goal. So I'm pretty grateful for that, and I think that's some measure of the shift in thought process and engagement in this region. Now, the real measure will be when we get back to the hard stats. How many acres have we protected? How much are all these people who are cheerleading starting to put their shoulder to the wheel and put money and resources behind doing this?
So looking at the community engagement and exploration and getting out and just simply using the land that both of your organizations conserve and protect, could both of you just do a shameless plug websites, social handles, all of that. So if someone is listening and is maybe in your area or going to your area, they know where to find the areas that they could get out, hike at, all of that.
Go for
I
it.
think it. Oh, sure. I think obviously littleforks.org. You could find every bit of information about us. You could find out about where our nature preserves are, how you could become a volunteer, how you can obviously donate, become a member, join our efforts, or like I said, getting involved is kind of key. So definitely that's kind of our main driver. We have, we're on Instagram and Facebook. We're under littleforks.org or Little Forks. I'll be honest, I'm not the social media guy, so I may let things down, but I think really the first thing is just finding, go to those sites, reach out, stop by our office, give us a call, come on a hike, volunteer for one of our stream monitoring programs or river cleanups, and kind of meet our small staff and take those further steps. But really that community understanding what we do is kind of key.
I'll say to listeners, since you're not the social media guy, that they can probably just search Little Forks Land Conservancy on Facebook and Instagram. I'm sure you guys will pop up easily.
We show up
without
everywhere,
a handle.
hopefully.
Our website is Six Rivers RLC, because we used to be Six Rivers Regional Land Conservancy, and we just frankly we're lazy. We dropped regional. It's too many words. It's a lot more to write. So Six Rivers Land Conservancy. If you just Google Six Rivers, make sure you go down far enough to find the Land Conservancy, and you don't click on the brewery out west, because there is a Six Rivers brewery, which probably demands a road trip at some point. But Six Rivers Land Conservancy will come up. We've got Instagram, Facebook, I think Twitter or whatever that is now. We've got folks that handle that. And we have lots of stewardship field days where we go out and manage properties. Those are big volunteer days. Some of those are wide open to the public, and some of those are with corporate partners. So our friends at Consumers, our friends at Stellantis, which used to be Chrysler, those guys will come out. We'll get 30 or 40 of those guys out in the field on a day managing a property. So those are good opportunities. We have historically had a program called the Adventure League. It started out as taking people kayaking on the Six Rivers. We should get people out to see these rivers. That expanded a little bit. We do some hikes. We do kayaking. On occasion, we do the self-guided thing. So keep an eye on our website to see what's coming up on that front. And we also have a photo contest we do. And the pictures have to be from Southeast Michigan. Don't be sending me a picture of an elephant, right? Or, a balloon on Torch Lake. The whole point is to discover the cool stuff that's down here.
Well, we are extremely grateful for both of you as well for being on here and helping not only promote our mission, but that we can also help promote yours and work together.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you guys.